So when we go in the plant, before we get in the plant, we got a little bit of paperwork that you're going to have to read and sign, saying you're not going to touch anything, you're not going to take any pictures. And we're going to put a fancy red hairnet on you and get you a yellow vest.
This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. Take off all your jewelry. No pins, no earrings. Take any pen with a cap on it and put it deep in your pocket. Leave your cell phone in the car. Today, we're going inside the blueberry industry to see exactly how the berries in your smoothie get from the field to the table. We're on a tour down east with the Maine Wild Blueberry Commission. This is part 2 of a 2-part series. If you missed part 1, don't worry, we'll get you caught up in a moment. Last week, we learned how to grow them. This week, we pick them and freeze them. And chances are, it's nothing like you thought it was. There have been big changes in our blueberry barrens and big changes in the processing plants. There have also been big changes in blueberries worldwide, which is really putting the hurt on our own blueberries. The Wild of today's Wild Maine is all about wild blueberries. It's brought to you by Hammond Lumber, Bar Harbor Whale Watch, Napa Auto Parts, and EBS. Now, let's catch up. Last week, we were on a bus learning how to grow wild blueberries. Dr. Dave Yarborough is the blueberry specialist at the University of Maine Cooperative Extension Service, and he explained why the best blueberries in the world can only be grown in the northeast corner of North America.
Part of the reason we have the wild blueberry just in the northeast, our type of wild blueberry, has to do with the geology and the climate. And the biggest geological event we've had recently is the Glacier, and that was about 10,000 years ago. And as that glacier melted and receded, it kind of worked its way back and forth and ground up a lot of the material. First, it shoved all of the topsoil that was produced over thousands of years out into the bay for the lobsters, so they had plenty of food to foster that industry. And so what we were left with when that glacier kind of receded back and forth was actually a bunch of sand over marine clay. And so as that land came up, it was really quite sandy.
Now, our blueberries are wild. You're also familiar with cultivated blueberries, the big ones that look great in a salad but don't pack nearly as much flavor. For purposes of this show, consider those to be the enemy.
If you look at the wild blueberries versus the cultivated blueberries, the first thing you'll see is the wild blueberries are a lot smaller. And they're a lot smaller because they haven't been selected from the wild. Cultivated blueberries have been selected mostly for higher yields, larger fruit, easier picking, that type of thing. And so they're very different than the wild blueberries, which have a natural population. There's a lot more natural variability out there, and this natural variability has some drawbacks and also has some advantages. And some of the advantages are that we have a lot of genetic diversity out there. With a cultivated variety, you can take a hardwood cutting off a bush, put it in cold storage, put it in the ground in the spring, it roots, and 3 to 5 years you have a huge bush with lots of blueberries on it. Our wild blueberry doesn't propagate very well at all and spreads very slowly. That's another reason that we have the wild blueberry here in the northeast in Maine, Atlantic Canada, and they don't have it throughout the world. Cultivated blueberry can be planted in much more extensive environments. It's planted extensively throughout the U.S., Europe, and most of the plants, whether they be in China or Australia, the origin is North America.
So here's why we've got trouble. First, we've gotten much better at growing wild blueberries. They're wild because they grow anyway, even if we paid them no attention. But on our commercial fields, we paid a lot of attention. Back in the 70s, we learned how to fertilize the blueberries without fertilizing the weeds. We learned how to manage pests. We learned how to irrigate. We spent a bundle on getting bees up here from Florida to pollinate. It took a while, but we learned how to mechanically harvest. We're now able to get up to 10,000 pounds of blueberries from a single acre of field. And with all of our fields, we can now grow around 100 million pounds a year. And if we were the only ones doing it, we'd be in really good shape. But as Darren Hammond of Wyman's Blueberries explains,
the number of wild blueberries that have been grown in Canada over the last few years has significantly increased. But in the next few years, we're going to see
1 billion pounds of cultivated blueberries that are grown in North America. There's also blueberries being grown in Chile and Peru and Argentina and all over the world now.
So last week we learned how to grow them. This week we pick them and get them to market. That brings us to right here, the back corner of a big blueberry field somewhere in the edge of Columbia Falls. This is Cherryfield Foods, and Dave Bell is CEO.
Do help yourself to all the wild blueberries you want, and do notice the different colored berries on the different color clones, and also the different flavors. So sample some different colored berries in the field.
Already mind blown. Up until now, I really wasn't aware of how different wild blueberries can taste from each other. But standing here, you can see various clones. And that's exactly what they are, clones. One berry patch is really just one plant, with roots spreading underground. One plant can span an area the size of a football field. But out here, the clone patches are smaller. As I look around, it's now obvious that some plants are growing a little taller, the berries are a little different in color from one patch to the next, and most surprising, you can actually taste a difference between this row of berries and that one.
So as I mentioned on the bus, this is one of our developmental harvesters.
Really, these days, everything is a developmental harvester. Mechanical harvesting was invented decades ago, but it's taken a while to perfect them, and there's still a lot of experimentation going on. Early harvesters did a lot of damage to plants, and yields weren't so great. And of course, it matters whether you're harvesting low bush or high bush blueberries. Essentially, there's a harvester head about the size of a riding lawnmower that scoops through the plants, sort of like the old blueberry rakes did, but then conveying the blueberries back into bins. Each head isn't particularly big, but you can go from a one-head walk-behind machine to a farm tractor size arrangement with 2 heads, right up to these behemoths in front of us right now that have 5 heads harvesting blueberries. 15 years ago, maybe 80% of all blueberries were being raked by hand. These days, over 80 to 90% are mechanically harvested.
So the question is, how do we know when the boxes are full on the back of the harvester? There's an electronic eye that's monitoring the height, and then it'll shut off the conveyor momentarily, and the berries will build up in the conveyor, and that'll give the machine time to switch a new tote into place. So what's better about the new machine? Well, labor's a big challenge. We're always trying to improve our efficiency to stay competitive, so that these machines have 5 heads. The original tractors had 1 head, and now most of them are doubles. Before we went to the tote system, you had a person on the back. So right now we have 2 operators for 10 heads, when we used to have 5 operators and a person on the back. So, you know, we used to have 10 people. Now we got 2. Have you ever seen that movie on houses, The Money Pit? Well, this is the machine equivalent. They're developmental. This is the 3rd season, so we poured, far more, money into them than you would. The problem is, a lot won't be produced, so it's all custom work.
Even though mechanical harvesting has been around for a while, there's still plenty of developmental challenges. These big machines in front of us were originally cotton pickers from John Deere that have now been fitted with blueberry harvesting heads. Dave Bell is CEO of Cherryfield Foods. While we're out here in the fields watching the harvest, we'll get him back on the bus in a moment to tell us more about Maine's wild blueberries. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. You're on a bus with the Maine Wild Blueberry Commission. On last week's show, we learned how wild blueberries are grown in Maine. This week, we're picking and preparing them for market. We're down east in Columbia Falls. Over 100 million pounds of blueberries are harvested in Maine each year, and the biggest grower is this one.
I'm David Bell. I work for Cherryfield Foods, Maine Wild Blueberry Company. We have a large farm, over 10,000 acres, and we work with a lot of independent growers, and we have 2 processing facilities, one in Machias, which is a freezing plant, and then we also have an old small canning facility in Cherryfield, Maine. The roots of our company go back to Stewart Canning Company, which goes back to the 1860s. And they're one of the original wild blueberry canning companies, and they canned wild blueberries for the Union troops. Some people say that's why we won, because their eyesight was better. Of course, the fields around Wyman's processing facility, the airport, and alike are part of the Barrens, and I think Dr. Yarborough talked to you about the Glacial Outwash Plains, which is a very unique geologic feature here in the state of Maine. As we go by here on the right, this is one of Wyman's large fields, but you can look across that plain, and that's all a sand and gravel aquifer deposit. It's about 1,000 acres of continuous wild blueberries. But then if you look off, especially back hard off over your right shoulder, you can see kind of the tops of those trees. And you probably recall we just came up a grade. So again, these glacial outwash plains tend to be higher in the landscape, and then those lower areas are heavier soils, marine clay deposits, mostly silts and clays. And what happened was, as the rushing water of the glacier came down and met the ocean, which was many miles inland from where it is today. Of course, fast water meeting the still water, the velocity slows down, and the first thing that happens is that bigger materials that are being carried by the water, the rocks and the sands and the gravels, settle out first. And then, of course, a lot of the fine soil particles, the clays and silts, are in suspension, and those actually went out into the ocean, and then they settled. And because the ice was over a mile thick, the Earth's crust was actually depressed. So over the last 10 or 12,000 years, the Earth's crust has rebounded, and then the ocean got pushed out.
So one reason there are blueberries where there are blueberries is because there isn't a lot of deep topsoil that allows big trees in those glacial outwashes. Most of whatever grew there was kind of scrubby, and that gave blueberries a chance to grow as soon as there was any disturbance, like fire. Speaking of fire, you don't see much burning anymore, even though these fields have been burned for at least 5,000 years. The Indians used to do it.
That's what we think the first management practice was, when the Native Americans would prune them. And then the traditional method for many years, through the 1800s, into the middle end of the 1900s, the traditional method was to prune. And first it was just setting wildfires, then it was spreading straw to enhance the burn and light off the straw, and then we moved to propane and oil-fired burners, which probably many of you folks have seen. But really, since the 1980s or so, we've converted over largely to mowing, to prune. So we have a flail mower, and after the crop is taken off, it's mowed right to the ground, about within an inch of the ground. And this has quite a few benefits, the first of which is we're retaining the organic matter, the leaves and the branches, and returning it to that organic pad on the surface of the soil. The soils on the Barrens are very low nutrient and water holding capacity, most of which the nutrient water holding capacity is in that top organic pad, which really formed over many, many years from forest deposition of the leaves and the trees decomposing and the like, and over many generations of burning, that organic pad got reduced. So the impetus to kind of move to mowing was actually the oil crisis of the early 1970s, and the industry asked the university, is there another way? Could we mow these and still get the same types of yield? And it was proven we could. And so that's why we have moved to that. Cherryfield Foods was one of the first companies to totally eliminate burning, because, again, there's a big benefit to building that organic pad back up.
And that's another major change that has come to the blueberry barrens. Now that we're doing much more mechanical harvesting, and we're now mowing the fields every other year, you just can't have rocks in the way anymore. Wasn't a problem when berries were hand-raked and fire didn't have to actually touch anything. But now that everything is mechanical out there, the rocks have been coming out of the major commercial fields. But if you've ever been on Cherry Field Foods land, there's another mystery out there, too. What are those tree rows doing out there?
So, as we cross over the tree line here, we're entering onto Cherry Field Foods land. One thing you'll notice are these tree lines. We are the only grower that has planted these windbreaks. They're about 300 feet on center, and initially they were planted to help retain the snow in the winter. You can imagine, again, with these plains, the barrens kind of sticking up in the landscape, you can get a 2-foot storm, and then if it's been a dry snow, we have those northwest winds a day or two after, and this can be down to bare ground, and all the snow's in the woods, 8 or 10 feet deep. But in the cropping system, so those vegetated fields you see right now, they're setting buds for next year. And if those buds are freeze-dried due to very low temperatures and wind, then that will kill the bud, and then obviously we'll have no bloom and no crop the next year. So initially these windbreaks were planted to help to retain the snow in the winter. But then we found out that they had some other benefits. Another one is pollination. Honeybees are kind of like the tourists. They like it 70 degrees and no wind. And we don't have much of that in down East Maine in May. We're lucky if we have a few days. We really didn't have any this year. A few hours was more like it. But the windbreaks will change the microclimate, especially within 60 or 80 feet of the windbreaks. And so on a day that might be a total scrub on pollination, we'll at least get a good part of our field pollinating. And then the other advantage is you'll see the white stakes. We have 10,000 acres under irrigation, and each one of those stakes is a hydrant for our irrigation system. If we have a fairly windy day when we're irrigating, of course we won't get as nice of a spray pattern and an incomplete coverage. So it also provides some benefit when we're irrigating.
At one time, you might have just looked at these blueberry barrens and seen only the barrens. But now you know what the glaciers did here. You understand the windrows of trees. You know how the blueberries grow. And you might even be surprised at what else happened here.
This section is called we call this section the bombing range, because this was where the pilots and their bomb crews working out of Dowd Field in Bangor practiced. And yes, every once in a while, years ago, when we were putting in the irrigation, we'd run across a munition. Most of them were not live, but some of them were. And then about 3 years ago, the Department of Defense called us, and then they sent us a bunch of brochures saying we probably shouldn't be digging around here because there could be some bombs. We told them we found all we could.
Dave Bell, Cherry Field Foods. We're on their barrens in Columbia Falls, about 10,000 acres of prime wild blueberry fields. We're with the Maine Wild Blueberry Commission, and we've been watching how the berries are harvested. Next, we go to Wyman's in Duchesne and watch how they're processed. I'll give you a fair warning right now. Much of what we're about to see is a trade secret. This is Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. Saturday mornings at 9, Sunday mornings at 8 on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. I'm on the Maine Wild Blueberry Barrens with the Maine Wild Blueberry Commission. This is a two-part show. Last week we saw for ourselves how they grow them. This week it's all about harvesting and processing them. Now remember, these are wild blueberries. They were already growing here, but we've learned how to take a field that used to produce 2,000 pounds per acre, and with fertilizing, pruning, integrated pest management, irrigation, and pollination, we figured out how to get 10,000 pounds of blueberries off a single acre. That's a lot of blueberries all at once. It's a round-the-clock effort to get them all frozen while they're still at the peak of flavor and health benefits. We're now at Wyman's processing facility in Duchesne, and we can take some of the mystery out of how they do it but not all the mystery. This is Darren Hammond.
So when we go in the plant, before we get in the plant, we got a little bit of paperwork that you're going to have to read and sign, saying you're not going to touch anything, you're not going to take any pictures, and we're going to put a fancy red hairnet on you and get you a yellow vest for most of you, and we'll take you through the plant. So Wyman C&D, we have 3 freezing lines here in Dubois. We can freeze a lot of blueberries in a day. We use anhydrous ammonia refrigeration, which is very environmentally friendly. Some of the corn farmers in the Midwest use anhydrous for fertilizer. It's a very good refrigerant, but we have one of the most amounts of anhydrous of any place in the state of Maine right here in this facility. So we built line 7, what we call line 7, in the winter of 2006. We froze blueberries for the first time in 2007, and that's the line that we're going to be going through. When we built it, we actually enrolled in the Pine Tree Zone program, which was a huge benefit for us. We really would like to see that program continue into the future. It was probably one of the reasons why we did decide that we were going to build that line here instead of in Canada. So when we go in, we're going to take you in and we're going to show you our fresh receiving area and how we track everything right from the field all the way through the process. And then we're going to walk you down through line 7 and show you how we bring blueberries in. We scan the tag, we dump the pallet, and 20 minutes later it goes automatically into our frozen inventory. So this facility that we're going to look at today only runs for between 30 and 42 days a year, which is basically the blueberry harvest. And then we do import a substantial amount of blueberries from Canada and freeze them at this facility. So everything that you're going to see run today, before it goes into a bag or a box, or whether it goes for retail sales, industrial sales, or food service, is all going to go to Cherryfield and is going to go through another processing line and get run through another laser to take all the defects out of it. We run lasers, and on line 7 we actually have a laser that looks at both sides of the fruit. The fruit actually comes out on the shaker and drops down through, and the laser is looking at both sides of the stream of fruit going through. And once it sees a defect, what happens is the laser leads the defect and shoots that defect out of midair, and it goes out into another conveyor into our sorter rejects. So we can run this line at about 20,000 pounds an hour and get 99.9% of all the defects out on the first time through. What is a defect? A defect is anything that is not a blueberry or off color. So if we're growing wild blueberries, so we have red ones, black ones, and we also have albino blueberries. So if you get a box full of white albino blueberries that goes through the line, when the blueberries hit the laser, it just goes crazy and it blows the whole box right out into the sorter rejects. So if it's a piece of moss, or if it's a insect, or a worm gall, or a twig, or a blueberry leaf, a lot of times there'll be a blueberry leaf that's stuck to the side of a berry, and that would be considered a defect. The laser can see color, and the new technology can see shape. There is some even newer technology, which we haven't implemented yet, that uses chemical imaging. So not only do we freeze blueberries here, but we also bring blueberries in from all of our outside growers, and we have a very rigorous compliance program now, where all of their chemical application records, fertility records, have to be submitted to us, and they have to be put into our system, or we can't buy their blueberries, to comply with the new Food Safety Modernization Act.
Part of what Darren Hammond at Wyman's in Dubois is saying sounds a little bit like code, but it's another way that the blueberry industry has changed over just the last few years. In 2011, Congress passed the Food Safety Modernization Act, FSMA. Subsequently, the FDA had to make a lot of new rules to implement the act, and many of those rules put very stringent requirements on food growers. We heard the same thing from every grower and processor. FSMA is a tough act to follow. As we enter the Wyman processing plant, one thing is immediately impressive. Every batch of blueberries that enters the plant gets labeled. That label follows the blueberries all the way to your dinner table. If anything ever goes wrong, Wyman's can trace any problem all the way back to exactly where the blueberry was grown. We're now getting the tour, which first requires that we remove all jewelry and anything that could fall into the processing line. We're wearing head nets. Much of what Wyman's is doing here is modern, innovative, and proprietary. We're not allowed to take photos, and by agreement I won't describe exactly what's going on, but this is it in a nutshell. At the loading dock, there are totes full of blueberries, each tote numbered with the origin of the berries. In a very short time after the blueberries are harvested, they go into the processing line, and a number of things happen very quickly. The berries go through a blower, which removes the lighter material like leaves and twigs. During this tour, we also visited the Allen's blueberry processing plant in Ellsworth, too, and some of the same things are going on. The berries go into a vat of flowing water. Good blueberries sink, bad ones float, bad ones are skimmed off. At one of those facilities, the blueberries get another bath in sugar water, which changes the specific gravity of the water, and the blueberries float, with the heavier stuff, like pebbles, sinking. Then the blueberries get another bath to make sure there are no germs or contaminants. As Darren Hammond was saying, their blueberries next go to a conveyor belt and tumble off in front of lasers. The lasers can instantly detect anything that is a wrong shape or color and knock it out of the stream with pinpoint accuracy at the speed of light. Finally, the berries go into a freezer so cold that each berry is instantly frozen at the peak of freshness. All of this, the conveyor belts, the blowers, the baths, are incredibly noisy. So I'm not describing this inside the plant, not just because I agreed not to, but also because you couldn't have heard it anyway. Up next, we're headed to Jonesport, where another processing plant is packaging fresh blueberries for the market. Stand by. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. This is Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket with Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. I'm out with the Maine Wild Blueberry Commission today. It's part 2 of a 2-part series on wild blueberries. On last week's show, we discovered how they grow them. This week, it's harvesting and processing. Patricia Contour handles publicity and promotion for the commission. We're on the bus.
So the next stop is a grower-packer. This is a diversified business. They are growers, but they're also truckers. They do less trucking now. It's a family-run business, and they're going to show us how a fresh pack line processes.
We're in Jonesport. This is Rockdale Farm. Unlike the bigger growers, many of the blueberries being processed here are for the fresh market. They're being boxed and sent off to grocery stores even as we watch. Compared with what we were seeing at Wyman's and Cherryfield Foods, this is certainly more typical of the smaller operations in Maine. A lot of hand raking still goes on here. We're in a building that's the size of a large garage, something maybe the size of an auto repair shop. In the very center, a conveyor belt that carries the berries through a blower. As we've seen elsewhere, it blows the leaves and twigs off the belt, leaving the berries in place. The berries are then carried across a sorting table where 6 women right now are carefully picking out the bad ones that are green or white or anything that's just not right. From here, they go directly into boxes for market, where another gentleman has a pair of forceps and he's picking out any remaining off-color berries before the cover is put on and the box goes to market. The owner is Sanford Kelly. He's 92 years old, still going strong and absolutely loved by his staff.
Well, I have a couple of like harvesters that are due here very shortly with the berries that are going to be processed. So I'm not going to talk about them till they get here, but I do want to say something special about them because we try very, very hard to get a quality blueberry. And it all starts, okay, with that rake. If you don't rake them right, they don't come up right. But so they understand the necessity of giving us a good product. And they're very, very lovely people. And you know, I'm very, very fortunate. And I can't say enough about the line. They've been with me for a number of years. We started in 1994, and this year is our best as far as demand. Although we always have good demand, we don't lack demand. What we have trouble in keeping up with the demand, actually, which is a good thing. But and I think I can say that about the whole fresh pack industry this year. there's a good demand for our product. The season has been dry, very dry, and that's tough on blueberries, particularly if you're not irrigating. I guess I'd go back and tell you that in 1992, that Maine had 50 million pounds, and our Canadian friends had 20 million pounds. In 2016, we had 100 million pounds, and our friends in Canada had 300 million pounds. And that puts a tremendous pressure on our industry.
And there it is again. Wherever you go amid the wild blueberry fields in Maine, the story repeats. Maine's low-bush blueberries are the best in the world. They pack more flavor. They pack more vitamins. Blueberries have become much more popular thanks to these health benefits. But that has meant vastly more berries on the market. A lot of the increase coming from Canada. If that were the only competition, we'd be doing all right. But the cultivated high-bush blueberries have also seen vast increases in production, and the market is now so saturated that some of our growers will likely go out of business.
We down in Washington County have been especially hard hit. Some of our growers aren't even harvesting this year. Some of them are giving up their equipment. Some of them are selling the land. And that's very, very disturbing, and I think it's a great industry, and it's certainly good for Maine, and I hope we don't lose it. I hope we don't lose it.
Sanford, Kelly, and his crew are doing okay, but others aren't. And this was a hard season. Too dry in most cases in most places. Only about 1% of Maine's blueberry crop goes to the fresh market. So who is buying those?
I have three major customers. Number one is Blue Sky Produce, and she takes the pints. And we can't keep up with her demand. She's down into New Jersey now, and she's growing every year. She's just lovely for our industry. And then we have Secretary of Agriculture, Bob Spear. He's a major customer of ours. He takes 5-pound boxes. We can't keep up with him. And then we have Jigger Clark in Damascata, Clark's Market, and he's a major customer.
There's another challenge out on those blueberry barrens: labor. On the one hand, all the mechanized harvesting and processing has eliminated a lot of menial labor jobs, but the labor force is also shrinking. This area of Maine is particularly famous for people who have traditionally worked multiple seasonal jobs to make ends meet, and some of that has gone away. Once again, this is Dave Bell of Cherryfield Foods.
You take the wild blueberry business and you talk to people my age, and there was thousands of them that raked wild blueberries, right? You know, there was a lot of them that probably only lasted a day, but they remember that experience. And then there's others that did it for, 5, 6, 7 years. So there's just not those opportunities. I mean, basically, that tradition happened, because of the Down East way of cobbling together a living, working in many different industries, one of which was raking wild blueberries. And back in the day, and not too long ago, 30, 35 years ago, you could have a family out here raking. And granted, the young kids, probably trampled more berries than they ever raked, but they observed their parents working and their older siblings and the like.
What to do about finding workers when there aren't any? That's becoming a chronic problem in parts of rural Maine, and there's a very good chance that we are accidentally making it worse. The next few minutes of this show borders on the controversial. Stand by. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. Welcome back to Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. You and I are with the Maine Wild Blueberry Commission. We're down east on a tour of the blueberry industry. As it has always been, blueberries have always produced a lot of seasonal jobs. During raking season, we had a lot of migrant labor up here. Now that the industry is more mechanized, much of that need for migrant labor has disappeared. But Maine still has 100 million pounds of blueberries all coming ripe at once, and they've got to get out of the field and into the freezer in a very short period of time. Plus, there are a lot of jobs associated with the growing season and with the packaging process. I was on a business tour of Aroostook County last winter and was surprised to hear the same refrain I am now hearing down east. Rather than scorn immigrants, there are some parts of the Maine economy that actually depend on the arrival of a new workforce. Now, I didn't ask Darren Hammond the question, but it was asked.
Did you all get impacted by the slowdown in immigration okays for this year? Or I don't know how many of the migrants got impacted by that. Or
Actually, Wyman's utilizes the E-Verify program. So all of the employees that we have working for us can pass E-Verify.
So you didn't have to use immigrant
So we don't use the H-2A or the H-1B immigration. So that really didn't affect us. One thing that we do have some people that live here year round that are under the TPS system, the temporary protective status, and honestly, they are very, very worried that the temporary protective status could, with a stroke of a pen, just be rescinded. And they are very, very critical to our business. Some of those employees, they have a lot of training. And one thing that Wymans would really like to see, would be potentially a pathway to citizenship for those type of people that are here in the country legally, that have to go but they have to go and renew their status every 18 months. It's very difficult for some of them. They have commercial driver's licenses, so every 18 months they have to go and renew their commercial driver's licenses, do their fingerprinting, the whole gamut. Where somebody that's a U.S. citizen or somebody that has a green card only has to go get their fingerprints done every 6 years or 3 or 6 years.
And for these individuals, they're not only critical to our operation at Wyman's because they've been with us a while, they know how things operate. But they're also to take the bigger picture. Everyone here is involved in statewide politics or in some at the federal level. They're also members of the community as well now. They shop at our grocery stores, they go to our restaurants. For a county like Washington County, where every day there's fewer of us living here, everyone we can hold on to is quite valuable and important, not just at Wyman's.
Many of them own their own homes. So if their status was rescinded, they would not be eligible to work.
That was actually the second time of the tour that the subject came up. Dr. Dave Yarborough, the blueberry expert at Cooperative Extension, brushed on it when we were learning about why industry has gone gung-ho for mechanical harvesting. In the long run, it's more efficient and cost-effective. But it was also becoming a necessity.
So they've really increased the amount of mechanical harvesting. And the mechanical harvesting head was actually developed by Gleason Gray, who worked for Cooperative Extension back in the 1970s as a student, and it's kind of a open reel picking head that combs the berries off, and it goes back into a conveyor belt back into the boxes, and we'll see some of those operating today. But currently, we're probably at about 80-90% mechanically harvested fields, just because it's very difficult to get labor anywhere in the state in the summertime, especially short-term seasonal labor. We still do have some people come in and harvest, and actually, some people might harvest 100 boxes a day at $2.50 a box. But Darren Hammond said he had a new record this year. One of his rakers raked 414 boxes in one day. These are about 25 pounds boxes. Yeah, the half bushel box. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. The people that do come up, we still do have a lot of Central American Mexicans, and they're here to make some money, and they make, really, it's probably no other crop that they can make as much money as wild blueberries doing that hand raking.
And we heard it again at Allen's Blueberries in Ellsworth, where they have a very good workforce of experienced seasonal employees who come up from Haiti. And we heard it from Dave Bell at Cherryfield Foods, where there is a constant search for employees.
A couple other comments I'd like to, make on labor that I think would be valuable for you folks as policymakers. And you know, a lot of us for years have been very proud of the work ethic of Maine workers, and you know, that was definitely true, you know, 30, 40 years ago, but unfortunately I think, you know, we're starting to lose quite a bit of that. Frankly, our best workers are aged 50 to 80, and a lot of us won't be around for 30 more years. We have one woman right now in the plant down at Machias, and we have a couple other women that are in their 70s, but we have one woman that's 80, and she's working 6 12-hour days a week. You know, she doesn't have to work 6 days. She just doesn't want to work 7. But, you know, she's one of our core team. She works for us year-round. And we have, for the last few years, we've been working with the Down East Correctional Facility and their work release program. You folks probably recall that the governor proposed to close the prison. There's been many governors have proposed that in recent decades. While we don't believe the corrections department should exist to supply us labor, there has been a successful work release program that's helped out a lot of the seasonal businesses down here, including wreath making and the lobster processing facilities. And currently we have 26 work release employees working for us seasonally here. Through the winter we had 6 to 8. Obviously it presents certain challenges to us as the employer and to the correctional facility, but kind of our priority as far as employees go is to hire from the local community first, and you've heard our challenges about that. Second is the work release program, if there's one available, and the third is migrant labor. And frankly, if that facility closes, we're going to probably be forced into the migrant labor for the processing season. Again, the fresh season supports 50 year-round jobs in reprocessing. But if we can't get the crop frozen, we have nothing to reprocess and sell.
We'll close out the show by returning to the core problem. Blueberries are now more popular than ever, but that spurred a lot of competition. Maine has doubled production. Atlantic Canada now produces about 3 times what we do, and the cultivated blueberries are grabbing a lot of market share. The challenge is that the average consumer doesn't know the wild blueberries are fresher, more flavorful, and healthier for you. But if you ask Dave Bell, CEO of Cherryfield Foods, whether the average consumer just looks at those cultivated berries and thinks that bigger is better, he'll say,
absolutely. I mean, most U.S. consumers buy with their eyes, and bigger is better in America. And in fact, in the not too distant past, Dole food company, frozen foods, put wild blueberries in their blueberry bag and didn't label them as such, and they got complaints from their customers of where did these runty little berries come from. We have a barrier to frozen in that the perception of the consumer is that fresh fruits and vegetables in the grocery store are more nutritious than frozen. But if those fresh fruits and vegetables have taken 5 to 8 days to go through the supply chain and then sit on your counter or refrigerator for another 2 or 3 days, guess what? The frozen is better, and there's actually research to back that up. I mean, we're getting the berries you picked this afternoon will be frozen by tomorrow morning. Probably frozen by 3 or 4 a.m. So the shelf life for frozen, I mean, you can, if you keep them cold enough, you can store them for 2.5 years with no loss of quality. Yeah. But they have to be real cold, not the temperatures they store in the grocery store.
And with that, we bid farewell to the Maine Wild Blueberry Commission, but not before we anoint you as an apostle for the Maine Wild Blueberry. Wild is better, and Maine is best. If all you want is a little decoration for your lettuce, those big cultivated blueberries will get the job done. Otherwise, you want flavor, go wild. Speaking of wild, there's a chance to go wild with me coming up next month, Saturday, October 14th. I'll be the official host of a very special lighthouse tour. At 8 a.m. that morning, we're climbing on board one of the big, fast, jet-powered catamarans in the Bar Harbor Whale Watch fleet and cruising around Mount Desert Island, past Donington and Castine, through Eggemogan Reach, under the Deer Isle Bridge, and travel up the Penobscot River, viewing Fort Knox and steaming under the Penobscot Narrows Bridge. We won't turn around until we get all the way to Bangor. We'll pass 10 lighthouses along the way. We'll tell you about each and every one, and we're doing it at the peak of fall foliage season. It's a day-long trip. If you're interested, get the info and make reservations at barharborwales.com. barharborwales.com. Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine returns next Saturday morning at 9, Sunday morning at 8, and online afterwards at 929theticket.com. We're heading up to the Allagash for next weekend's show. Brought to you by Hammond Lumber, Napa Auto Parts, Bar Harbor Whale Watch, and EBS. This is Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket.